Hello, and welcome to the podcast that tries to answer one simple question. What is this thing called film noir? I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. With the release of Spike Lee's new film, Highest to Lowest, starring Denzel Washington, this seemed like the perfect time to look at the film it is based on. Akira Kurosawa's classic 1963 suspense thriller, High and Low, an adaptation of Ed McBain's novel, King's Ransom. My partner on this high-speed journey is Aidan Brack, a public librarian with a love of mystery fiction. He started his blog, Mysteries Ahoy, in late 2017 as a way to connect with other fans of mysteries and to catalogue his experiences with the genre. Since then, he has shared his thoughts on over 600 books, 100 film television productions, as well as the occasional radio drama. Aidan enjoys reading and writing about many different types of mystery fiction, including works in translation. He has a particular interest in inverted mysteries, stories in which the culprit's identity is known to the reader from the near start. You can find his writing at www.mysteriesahoy.com. But now, let's get on that high-speed train and see what Akira Kurosawa's got waiting for us. Aidan, welcome to the podcast. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here finally.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Before we start talking about super exciting things like we're going to, let's talk about film noir in broader terms. And can you give me a definition of film noir? It doesn't have to be your definition. It can be somebody else's if you like. But, go for it.
For me, film noir, if you think of genre as being like boxes or rooms, film noir is like the window into that room. So it colors the way that you see it, and it kind of gives you the context. So it sometimes warps and distorts what you're seeing, but it's very much a perspective for me, as opposed to a genre in itself.
I've never had it described that way. That's so cool. And I know exactly what you mean as well. So, therefore, through that particular lens, what would be the first film noir that you think you ever saw, or the first one that made an impact?
The first one that made an impact for me was The Third Man, which remains my favorite film of all time.
Right.
It is an incredible film. And I remember I was 15 or 16 years old. My dad had got it on VHS and he said, come in, you might want to take a look at this. I like this film. You might like it too. And I'd seen other films that were in the PI or film noir genre before, but I'd never really connected with them. And that was the point at which I suddenly realized film noir can be funny. It knows what it's doing. It's deliberate. It has themes that I could connect with. And I really appreciated that Holly is a complex character who wants to be a hero, but isn't very good at it. And once I understood that that was a deliberate choice, it all clicked for me. And it has the amazing cinematography, fantastic performance from Orson Welles, and that haunting zither score.
The third man, hated by 1,000 men,
desired by one woman.
the third man, hanging is too good for him.
Nothing is too good for the third man.
Her man was the third man.
The man on every woman's lips.
And then the next summer, we went on vacation to Slovenia. And we were staying in this hotel. And this hotel, every night at dinner, had a zither player. And there's only one recognizable zither tune. So every night, 3 or 4 times, you'd hear the Harry Lime theme pumping in. And I came back from the vacation. I wanted to watch it again. And it's been on repeat for me ever since.
It is an absolutely addictive tune. It's got to be said. Have you listened to the radio versions?
Yes.
The prequel, as it were. And that gets a lot of airtime in every single episode. I mean, it was kind of like the big selling point of that show. Almost more than Graham Greene, more than Orson Welles. It's that fabulous music. Now,
it is.
No, that's great. So a real kind of audiovisual sensory experience. Yeah, that's as it should be. Now, that's perfect.
Aidan, I'm a big fan of the blog, and if I could just get the title of it right, things would be so much better. So it is called
Mysteries Ahoy.
Mysteries Ahoy. Tell us a bit more about your blog, please.
I started Mysteries Ahoy in 2017. I'd been doing other kinds of blogging projects before. I'd blogged about young adult literature with my wife. We had a podcast for a while. And then I was Doctor Who blogging. But all of that had kind of come to a halt around the time my kid was born. And then a couple of years later, my kid's a toddler. I am working in libraries and I am being asked for book recommendations all the time. And I thought to myself, it would be really helpful if I had a place I could look through and see what I thought about books, or, you know, what was that book I read? I can do a quick search and find out. So I started Mysteries Ahoy for me, and also because I wanted to connect with other mystery fans and find out book recommendations from people who are more knowledgeable than me. And it has been a great experience. I write about mystery fiction, old and new, mostly old, and I'm very interested in particular in inverted mystery novels, which are mysteries where you know the killer's identity from the beginning. Think of Columbo as sort of the archetype.
Are you watching Poker Face at the moment? Yeah.
I haven't seen season 2 yet, but I'm very excited.
Yes, I've only seen the first one, but I loved it. I mean, very occasionally she really does do a Peter Falk impersonation. It's just brilliant. But I love that show. And Ryan Johnson clearly is such a lover of the genre. So,
exactly.
Yeah, the inverted mystery tends to divide readers and viewers a little bit, actually. They're so interesting. I'm a huge fan, but I know not that many people who are as big fans. So I think it's probably one of the things I like about the blog.
Thank you.
If I'm completely honest. So well done, you.
It took me a while to kind of get what it was doing again, just like noir for me took a while. But for me, what I love about inverted mysteries is the idea that if you take away the whodunit element of the puzzle, you're just looking for a different part of the equation. So it's why were they doing it? What are the causes? And the film we're going to be talking about today does exactly that. It is very interested in why a crime has been committed, even if we don't entirely get a clear answer at the end.
You got to tell me a little bit about your dad's books. I have not read any of them.
My dad is a mystery novelist. His name is Aidan Brack. He started writing his books around the same time that I began my blog, and I've never written about any of them. Try and keep that dividing line there. Dad writes 2 series. One of them is a series of police procedurals set in the modern-day Czech Republic, featuring a older cop who kind of grew up working in the Soviet era and who's kind of transitioned into the more open, democratic Czech Republic. That's probably the series that would be more of interest to noir fans. The other series is a historical mystery series set in the Netherlands during the reign of William of Orange. And that has historical intrigue, and he kind of trots around the globe a little bit, goes to different European courts. And the main character in that is a priest who simultaneously, he is a Protestant, to all intents and purposes, but he is actually privately Catholic, and he has to deal with this. He has to be different in public than he is in private.
Oh, thanks for that. No, that's just brilliant. And I'll make sure we've got a link to that on the podcast page. And there's a very nice page about the books on your blog too. And I'll make sure that obviously that link's included as well. So going back to, we were talking about obviously police procedurals and how that links into the noir tradition. Let's call it that now. I think after 80 years or more than 80 years, we could probably refer to it as some kind of tradition, some kind of form. So I think we need to talk about one of our favourite films, and probably one of the best films ever made, which is an easy thing to say, but damn it, we're going to try and prove it, which is High and Low by Akira Kurosawa. So let's start with a quick plot rundown, I suppose. What's High and Low about in the most simplest terms?
So High and Low is a mixture of boardroom intrigue, kidnapping drama, and then police procedural. It opens in a shoe executive's home as he's being approached by other executives in the company who want to stage a hostile takeover and push out the man they call the old man who's running the company, and they want to get themselves further up the corporate ladder. The main character, played by Toshiro Mifune, is opposed to taking part in this because he actually has his own plan to take over all by himself. And he's mortgaged everything. He's borrowed money from some pretty shady characters, and everything is about to come off to achieve his takeover when he receives a phone call. And that phone call says that his son has been kidnapped, and the amount of money that they need is basically all that he's got. he instantly says, yes, of course, I'm going to pay everything. I'm going to pay everything. Just get me my son back. And then his son walks back into the room, and it turns out that the kidnapper has mistaken another kid for his son. And that's really the starting point for everything. Is he going to pay the ransom, even though he isn't the father of the boy? It's just one of his servants' children who has been kidnapped.
So this is Yokohama in the early 1960s. The film came out in 1963 in Japan and comes from an American novel. And Kurosawa, as a filmmaker, was often seen as someone who was particularly interested in Western traditions, Western forms. You know, he was a big fan of directors like John Ford, had directed probably what might be considered the first Japanese police procedural.
Stray Dog,
thank you. In this case, the film is derived from a book called King's Ransom by Ed McBain. And that basic premise is true for both of them. I think it's this interesting moral dilemma, because then it becomes about, will you in fact pay the ransom, even though it's not for your child, it's your child's buddy, and they sort of look alike. Then things evolve from there. But going back a bit to High and Low right away, so one of the exciting things about that film is that it does have a kind of high concept premise. That basic notion that you were discussing there is one that you can immediately latch onto. We'll talk a little bit later about why that might seem familiar from something that's got nothing to do with either this film or the book that it's based on. But the complexity and the excitement of the film, of course, comes from the treatment. I'm someone who is as fascinated by filmmaking technique sometimes as I am about stories. One of the joys of this film is a film that tells a really good story with really strong characters, but also is absolutely fabulous in terms of just the approach, in terms of structure, in terms of the filming style, in terms of the technology. And in fact, it has a real fascination with technology and the filmmaking process. So I was hoping that we'd get an opportunity to sort of talk about some of those things, because that opening section of the film that you alluded to, which is that we meet him and he's in his very nice air-conditioned home, which is sort of on this bluff looking down on Yokohama. All these executives are there and they're trying to get him to get rid of the man who basically created the company so they can make cheaper shoes and build in a sort of redundancy into the shoes, in the sense that they will fall apart after X number of weeks and they just stop making shoes that are actually durable. And he may have lost that battle, of course. But then it turns out, no, he's planning his own leveraged buyout. And basically, he's got his own nefarious plans. That opening part of the film is wonderfully done. With noir, there are some filmmakers like, say, Orson Welles or John Farrow, a less well-known filmmaker, who use very extended takes to create suspense, because it feeds into, I suppose, a theatrical tradition, because everything is happening in real time. I mean, I think there's one sequence in this first part of the film that is just under 10 minutes long, which must have been a nightmare to shoot, because basically it means that if anyone blows a line, you just have to start all over again. You know, you can't cut. You know, you've got all these complicated sort of camera moves, but a lot of it's just through staging and blocking. And it is just like a stage play, isn't it? You know, and from that point of view. And you would think that could be really dull. And in fact, it's very similar to the novel in this respect. The novel is, the first 40 pages of the book are just the business shenanigans of this character. And it's similar here, and yet I think it's utterly riveting. He's achieving this in a number of exciting ways, because yes, you have some of these very, very long takes. I mean, there's one that's at least 5 minutes, another one that's nearly 10. But the others that he's using super long lenses as well, so that the camera's incredibly far away, which of course then is sort of a clue to part of the plot, of course, so that there's a thematic and story link there. But visually, it's so dynamic. I mean, I think it's amazing how exciting just having all these people talking becomes in that film. It's amazing.
Absolutely. The first hour of the film essentially takes place in a living room. You get occasional cutaways to a stairway or to the little alcove where the car pulls in at the front of the house. But the entire film, the first hour, is shot downwards. So you've got the house, and occasionally you look out of the window down into the city of Yokohama. But as you say, a lot of the shots are very long for what people would expect, but you never really notice it. And I think a large part of that is because Kurosawa was a master at blocking. You mentioned it a moment ago. There are some sequences where what people are doing in the background is as important to the viewer as the characters talking in the foreground. Or sometimes you have the characters talking in the far background, and you can see the reactions on the police officers' faces in the front. You have so many actors all performing at the same time, drifting in and out of the space. And for me, I think that that is some of what makes it so dynamic. You have this sense that everyone's coming in and out. It is like an extended stage play, but it is so thoughtful and so deliberate. In my memory, before I went back and rewatched this film, I remembered the length of the shots, but I didn't really pay as much attention to what the camera was doing. But there are dolly moves, and it isn't as static as I had remembered. It didn't feel static watching it, but it's so subtle. The camera is never ostentatious. It's not distracting you from what's going on. It is there to reinforce and make sure you're seeing the characters that the director wants you to see, and that you're feeling the things that the director wants you to feel. There's one bit in that 5-minute scene you reference, which is when the chauffeur is going to plead with Mifune's character to pay the ransom to save his son's life. And it reminds me, you get him in the middle of the screen, and Mifune is going to walk backwards and forwards against the curtain. And it's so reminiscent to me of a scene in one of my other favorite films by the director, Throne of Blood, where Mifune is running up and down the wall as arrows thud in on every side of him. He doesn't want to have this conversation. It is so upsetting to him because while he's trying to be strong and not give in, he knows he's going to have to eventually.
Yeah, I mean, there is a kind of sense of, in that film, which is obviously an adaptation of Macbeth, so it actually is tragedy in that sense. But here there's a sense of almost tragic inevitability, and certainly inevitability about it, because what's, I think, so dynamic about this, it's like 55 minutes. It really is close to an hour, the opening section of the film, where a lot happens. But it's all about the trajectory of this character. We establish that he's this self-made man who started off a lowly shoemaker, in essence, working in leather goods.
An artisan.
An artisan, yeah. And he's slowly made his way up through the company. He's been sort of in the company for, 20-odd years.
Yeah.
And now he's in this position where he's wealthy. He's an executive. He's got a doting wife who, at a very pointed moment, and we'll discuss this later, but we discover, of course, that he built his sort of fortune on her dowry. Almost a throwaway line, but it's a brilliant moment.
Yes.
And we get all that information. Then you have this horrible, sudden moment, although the camera, as you say, doesn't overemphasize it at all. All of a sudden the phone rings, and it's just, and you see him, a lot of the time you see him from behind as well. It's kind of like the back of his neck, almost, and the rigidity of it, and the horror when he thinks his child's been kidnapped, and then that sense of relief. But who would do such a terrible thing? And then, no, it's been a mistake. They kidnapped the wrong child. Earlier on in the scene, they'd established that, in fact, the two boys not only look alike, but they're playing cowboys, and they've, in fact, swapped outfits, because I know I'm going to be the sheriff now. And
yes.
all that aspect of it, which is done. It's sort of happening in the background, but it's not underemphasized at all. And again, that Western influence into the so we say, modern day Japan, and something that Kurosawa was so interested in, who after all was interested in Shakespeare and Dostoevsky, and was a big fan of Simenon as well, for instance. And this is very much a Simenon-like book in the McBain series, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. And that all works superbly. And then you introduce this element, don't you, with the chauffeur, who is so humble and literally prostrates himself in front of the Mifune character to simply say, please lend me the money. Now, he's sort of saying, lend me 3 million yen.
Yes.
That's not a loan. It's kind of, if you're never going to pay it back, that doesn't count as a loan. But it's this idea of what's a human life worth, and what's the human life of a child worth. And it's something they deal with quite subtly, but it's there after all. They're saying, why would you do this with a child? Apparently, Kurosawa's interest in the story was it was perceived that kidnapping where the person was returned at the end, so let's put it that way, where the ransom was paid successfully, you would get 15 years sentence if you were caught and found guilty. And the perception was that was considered really quite low, and that apparently laws were changed after the film was released.
About a year later, yeah. The legal system in Japan, or the way that laws were made, it happened very slowly. And the legal system had been largely untouched since 1906 and 1907, according to what I've read. This is very much a issue that was important to contemporary Japan or Japanese society. And yes, changes were made a year or so later. Another thing is that Kurosawa apparently also had threats made against his own family as well about threatening to kidnap his child after the film was released. So,
well, because kidnappers felt that he'd given them a bad rap.
Given them an idea. Apparently, there was a child kidnapping that happened after this film was released where 10 days before the kidnapper had watched High and Low. So that link was connected as well. But the law was changed and the penalties were, I believe, made much stricter.
Yeah, this is fascinating because obviously, I mean, I grew up in Italy and you know, in the mid-1970s, I think Rome, where I'm from, was kind of almost the kidnapping center of the world, you know, eventually before it moved to South America. But let's get back to fiction.
Yes. Yeah, you make a number of really good points, though, about that opening sequence. And I think the other thing that is really different between the book and the film is that we don't get the kidnapper's perspective at all. So we're only seeing things as they're happening for Gondo King in his house. So he's reacting to everything. We don't have any clue about what the kidnappers know or don't know, if there's only one kidnapper, if there are multiple ones. I think that's another reason you have so much immediacy. It's always reaction. When I watched it for the first time, I didn't have a clue what was going to happen. I just thought it was a straightforward kidnapping film. So that moment where you get the switch around that occurs was mind-blowing to me. And I was totally hooked from that point onwards.
It's probably, I suppose, just quickly introducing the book that it's based on. We alluded to it earlier. So this is a book called King's Ransom and was the 10th in the 87th Precinct series, which was published as by Ed McBain, one of the pseudonyms used by Evan Hunter, although Evan Hunter was itself a pseudonym. The author was actually an Italian guy, or Italo-American, called Salvatore Lombino. And in the book, which is set in October 1958, quite a lot of the books at that time, 2 or 3 a year, were being published, and quite often he'd be quite specific about dates. So here it's the Granger Shoe Company. The executive is called Doug King, hence the title in this case. And it's the same basic plot. He's also planning to take over the company, and he's basically pledged everything they own so that he can do this maneuver and take over the company. And he's got a son called Bobby, and the son of the chauffeur is called Jeff, and one gets mistaken for the other. So it's 3 million yen in the movie. It's $500,000 in the novel. So this was the 10th novel. There would ultimately be 55 volumes in the series. I'm one of the few people I know who's read all 55 of them. I know you've read the book. Have you read many others, actually?
No, I've only read a couple of the others. I felt it was important to try and do the series in order. So I read I read King's Ransom, and then I went back and read Cop Hater, which I've not written about. And I started on the second book, and I didn't get much further with it than that series.
Oh, right.
Than that installment. But it's not for disliking it. It's just, there are a lot of books in that series.
There are. I mean, 55. And it's one that changed a lot over the decades as well. There are some that are actually quite close to the Simenon idea, where it's about motives and about psychological complexity as well as interesting plots. I mean, Cop Hater is, after all, a variant on a very famous Agatha Christie story, but one you just hadn't seen as a police procedural before.
No,
and so
absolutely.
It's fun. And another one, which is called Killer's Wedge, is a John Dixon Carr homage.
Oh,
And it's the kind of homage which has a locked room mystery in which the cops from the 87th sort of say, hang on, you only get this in John Dixon car books, not in real life. It's this sort of idea. So there's a strong awareness that he's both dealing with certain conventions, certain ideas, keeping such a long series as fresh as he can. And this was, in fact, a bit of an experiment because the detectives from the 87th are less present in this book. And I suspect that may have been sort of part of the appeal because as Evan Hunter, he wrote sort of strong dramas that were often very contemporary, that picked on certain themes and ideas that were very topical. And here it's this way of modulating the 87th Precinct series so that it is very focused on this horrible dilemma. Because, of course, we come back to this idea. He's asked for $500,000 ransom and he ultimately says, no, I won't pay. Mm-hmm. In High and Low, I love how, you talked about the staging, Kurosawa's fantastic staging and blocking, as well as the camera moves within what seems to be a very circumscribed space, which of course then becomes a plot point. Point of view becomes so important. It's very interesting, isn't it, when he sort of says, well, I won't pay, I can't pay 3 million yen. It will not only wipe me out, but it would actually put him in debt because he doesn't own the money that he's pledged. He'd have to give it back, and now he wouldn't be able to give it back. And therefore, put the whole family sort of into debt. He'd make them destitute. Yeah. And the film doesn't shy away from the implications of that at all, which is terrific. Initially, it's just this close situation where it's the family plus his sort of second in command, I suppose, is this young guy on the make. So it's his wife, his child who is there, the chauffeur, his son, who, of course, is absent. And then they decide to get the police involved. Now, this would be where you would get characters like Corella and Maya and Kling and Lieutenant Byrne, and they all have rough equivalents within the Kurosawa movie, but they are not quite the same characters. So there's this brilliant bit where they, when you tell us, how do they show up at the house and why do they do it in such a strange way?
So firstly, the kidnapper says, you cannot call the police. So Mifune's character, King, is, we have to go along. Don't call the police. Don't call the police. His son turns up. Call the police. We've got to get in touch with them. What's going to happen to the chauffeur's son? It doesn't matter. His son is going to be okay. They're going to figure out the dad has no money and they'll just return him anyway. Yeah. Call the police. So we're waiting and there's this delivery truck from a furniture store that shows up and guys in little white hats walk in and everyone's confused because it's the middle of the night, but they're aware that because the house is on the top of the hill, there is a very high chance that the kidnapper may be observing what's going on. So they're going to walk in disguise, and then they kind of camp out in the living room. And there's a scene later on where the kidnapper is going to ask to see inside this living room. They have to open up the curtains, and they have to hide behind pieces of furniture so that there's no way that even if he has a telescope, he could see that they're in there with them. It's a lovely conceit. It's a nice little... another surprise that you get.
One of the technically impressive elements of the film is that, of course, that they shot the sequence in 2 different places, so that when you're supposed to be able to see what's outside the balcony, which is so important because you have to be able to see downtown Yokohama because they're being observed, is the implication. We don't know that yet. And they weren't going to fake that. So they literally built that part of the set as a house in the right location. So they only shot the sequences where you have to be able to see behind them or they're standing on the balcony. Otherwise, everything else is done on the exact same set, as it were. They built it twice, and the other part is built at the studios, and all those sequences have to be done, and either it's nighttime sequences where they can use sort of little lights and get away with it, or because, the camera has to be only for those shots where it's pointing the other way. So you just think, oh my God, organizationally, that's just brilliant. You need to know exactly what you're doing. I mean, if you suddenly change your mind, what are you going to do?
I think that's one of the reasons that he was considered a fairly difficult filmmaker to work with, because he insisted on those kind of details being right. He's a filmmaker who will build a village for one of his films even though he's going to just fly past it in a camera move, but it has to have real beds in it that have been slept in. And he really wants everything to look as good as it can look. And he knows that that camera shot out of the windows is so important that if it doesn't look right, then the audience isn't going to believe anything that's happening.
I have but I'm going to hold it up for all the podcast listeners. So I have this edition of it, which is the BFI Blu-ray. Do you have that one?
I do not.
Do you have the Criterion?
I'm based in the United States, so I have the Criterion.
Yeah. Does it have that 35-minute making of documentary?
Yes, it's wonderful to create.
Did you watch that bit where they talk about how during one of the evening sequences, and they have to have somebody driving over a bridge, and so they're all doing it with walkie-talkies, and they're having shut down the bridge and sort of say, okay, you can go now.
Yes.
And then they have to start filming at just the right moment, and of course they're having to flood it with lights because of course it's not going to register unless it's way I thought, and they're so funny in the interview because they sort of said, it's almost like, I can't believe we went to this much trouble. And yet, at the same time, nobody is saying anything really negative about Kurosawa as an artist.
No.
Let's put it that way. But it was one of the most expensive films ever made until that time, which is fascinating considering it's a contemporary thriller.
Yes.
It's kind of like, what's so expensive?
It's the bullet train. The bullet train sequence he could shoot one time. And if he messed it up, the film wouldn't work.
Well, we've got to talk about that.
We've got to get to that bit, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got this initial section of the film, and the drama is him saying, I can't pay, I won't pay, it's not my son. What am I supposed to do? Just pay for everybody else who gets kidnapped? Which is, you could argue, a real contrivance, of course. This idea that it's happened at just precisely the wrong moment. Any other time in his life, he probably wouldn't have access to 3 million yen right there. But yes. Okay, we'll ignore that bit.
Yes,
because it's interesting because they don't make any of that at all. It's not by design. You could almost argue, but it's sort of like it'd almost be too much trouble to suggest how could the baddie know this, so they don't go into it. Again, we were talking about the blocking and the staging, so that it's quite interesting where you get different scenes where characters stand up and sit down, or stand up and then face the other way, depending what's being said. And there are some really stirring moments when characters stand up because they're standing up with the character. They recognize that they're doing the hard thing, but the right thing. But that means they get their complete respect, because certainly in the case of Gondo, it's very much this idea that he comes from that part of rich society, even though he built himself up. And they're not necessarily, it's like saying, look, I'm not interested in the fact that you got 3 million yen's worth of problems. I'm only interested in the little boy. Because ultimately, as the story develops, it's about him saying, I have to do this. It's done in lots of little drips and little things, so that when you get to that moment, it's a big emotional moment. And the cops are there because by this point they're getting these phone calls from the kidnapper, because we don't see the kidnapper full face for almost forever.
Yeah,
I mean it's well over hours.
Yeah,
but it's wonderful drama. I think it's so carefully and brilliantly worked out. So we get all of that. We've had this intense emotional drama, and we've reached this moment where he's basically sort of saying, I'm going to give up everything. I'm actually going to basically put myself in a situation where I'm actually in hock to all my creditors. My commercial life is sort of ruined because I'm pledging money that I happen to have in cash, but actually it's not all my money. But I'm going to spend it to get this kid back. And all of a sudden, we go to this ultra dynamic sequence on the train. So for 55 minutes, we've been watching this film all set in one room, and then we've suddenly leapt forward. I mean, that is brilliant.
It is brilliant. And before we move on to the train, I should probably say there's a lovely moment, though, right before that. So him saying he'll pay the ransom comes out of the blue. It comes against the grain. We kind of hope that he will, but nobody expects that he's going to make that choice. They're just telling him, get on the phone, say you're going to pay so that we can at least keep the kidnapper believing that it's going to happen. And then they're beginning to prepare the money to go in the little bags. And you get this moment where Gondo finds out that they're going to be using these bags and they need to put things in them. They need to hide a little color pouch and something that's going to make a horrible smell. And it means they have to cut these bags open. They're saying, get us a specialist. And he goes and he gets his little toolkit and he sits on the floor cross-legged and begins to do the work himself. And I think in that moment, it's a lovely character beat because you see that he is capable of restarting. That's the bit of him that he loves about working in shoes, the sense of craftsmanship, and there's a sense of renewal. And then from there you go jumping onto that train where he's clutching the little bags up against his chest and looking so tense. And as you say, it's such a dynamic, fast-paced scene. It's so unlike anything that comes before that it is a shock. And it moves so quickly. There's constant movement throughout the train, and we get handheld cameras walking down the corridors. So different than anything we've just seen, and it all unfolds so fast. This is another point where you get the comparison with the book. Both the book and the film have imaginative, clever technical schemes worked out by the criminal. I would say that the criminal in High and Low is far smarter than the criminals that we get in King's Ransom, but they both have technical schemes. And as the reader or the viewer, you're wondering, what on earth have they got planned to get this money so that they can get away without being caught by the police? Of course, in the book, you kind of know as it's happening, it's explained to you. But in the film, we know absolutely nothing until he gets the phone call and he's told what to do on the train.
We probably should quickly explain that one of the differences between the book and the film is precisely that in the book, we do, as it were, cross-cut from the kidnappers, which is this trio, a husband and wife, and then the man who came up with the idea and who is really cynical and bloodthirsty and hard-boiled, a guy called Cy. And so we know what they're up to. We know the child's okay. But we also have this inbuilt sense of tension there because the married couple, who the other two kidnappers, they're less, shall we say, they're less into it. They need the money, but they become more and more worried that Cy is in fact going to kill the boy. And that's not at all what they thought that they were in for, so therefore, so right away you start to think, oh, okay, is this going to lead to a way out of the situation? Because they are less willing, they're less, inverted commas, doing air quotes, evil in that sense. It's hard to have a lot of sympathy with kidnappers, obviously, but in this context they're not as bad as the other guy. In the film, by design, you don't see the kidnapper, the equivalent of the Psy character. You don't see that person for a very, very long time, but you hear their voice. But one of the things that I was so impressed by the film, on rewatching it, I realized I'd actually slightly forgotten that it has this very interesting technique, which is that quite often to not do the boring thing, as it were, or the standard thing, which is you get the phone call for the kidnapper, you have an argument, they put the phone down, and what they do is they record the conversation, and what Kurosawa does is that you don't actually hear it. You cut to later when they play it back. Yeah. Which is both a way of kind of displacing time so that you're actually able, within the confines of this physical space, able to nonetheless manipulate events in a kind of more structured and more dynamic way. But also it's the first evidence that we're getting of this fascination with the technology, the recording technology. So in this case, it's the audio technology, and can they trace? They never seem to be able to. I mean, some of those phone calls gone for ages, and they still can't trace the guy. So no. I know they need to talk to someone, obviously, at Yokohama Telephone Exchange. And then this will be explored later on. And yeah, one other thing you mentioned, of course, is this business about, we hear them talking about the fact that the kidnappers insisted that they use specific type of bags to deliver the 3 million yen, which has to be bundled up in specific amounts and used banknotes, no serial numbers, consecutive numbers, the usual thing. But they've decided to put this kind of pouch of powder that will turn into pink smoke. And it's this idea that it might help them find it if he burns the bags, which is kind of like, okay, interesting idea. And again, a very visual idea. Whereas in the book, of course, it's all about radios and triangulation and things like that, which are fascinating, but perhaps just a little bit less visual in this movie. In fact, in the book, you get brilliant diagrams on how you could build your own. It's sort of fascinating, which was very, very typical of the series. The McBain constantly have like documents and materials, to give it that sense of verisimilitude. But here we hear them talk about it, and we don't. What's this about bags? And then we hear them playing back the tape, where he says, "And you're going to have to put them in these 2 bags. They can't be more than, what was it, 70 millimeters or 7 centimeters." And then when we get on the train, which again is this fantastic thing, isn't it? It's kind of, one of the really interesting aspects of that documentary is where they talk about the ginormously headache-inducing preparation that they had to do to film on the train, because basically booked out an entire train. And so they're all extras, and they had kind of one shot at it, right? I mean, apparently they did go back and do a couple of extra bits, but they were kind of little bits. But the main thing was done using the kind of multi-camera technique that Kurosawa favoured at that point, which is using at least 2 cameras at the same time, which means knowing exactly where they're going to be and what they're going to capture and what they're not going to capture. So it's almost like you're directing the cameras twice and simultaneously. So they have to get out of each other's way. And it's brilliant because above everything else, I mean, I'm just going to put this in there, tell me what you think, but when they starts using handheld cameras. Now, this is actually really unusual because the film is shot in scope. So they're quite heavy cameras because they've got a big anamorphic lens at the front. And so this was actually pretty unusual. So the idea that you would have actually just someone rushing around, the effect is galvanizing. I mean, It's just brilliant. It's so dynamic, that sequence.
And there's a scene where one of the policemen is running through the corridor, and he has to run past the cameraman, and he kind of bumps him. And so you get a little camera judder that happens. Yeah. It is really so kinetic. And he also does a great job of emphasizing how tight that space is in general. And he uses little things like he needs 2 of the policemen to talk to each other, but they think that the kidnapper is on the train at that point. So one of them has to kind of accidentally trip up another police officer on the train. So they have a reason to kind of come face to face just to pass a single word. You need to go to this space in the train. You need to come up with an excuse. That location is used so well and so thoughtfully. And it's more than just a drop off for money. It is the key sequence in the film. And he gets all of that money that he put into that scene out of it in terms of the effect it has on the viewer.
And also, I mean, it has little moments which you sort of made me smile. It's a little bit like when they realised why the bag can't be more than a certain width, which is a little bit silly. But at the same time, it's kind of wonderful. But also, it's the kind of thing which Fritz Lang would have done in the 1920s, except it would have been Dr. Mabuse. Sort of saying this train has to pass this bridge at precisely this moment so you can throw the bag outside the window and it'll be caught by a car that I've got passing by at that exact moment. But it's here in the modern context. So this is a bullet train that's going very, very fast. So that's creating headaches for them because they're shooting on location. They had to find the exact place. And they talk about they actually took a roof off a house so that they could actually shoot an angle so that they could show the kidnapper, one with the boy and one who's going to collect the money. So they prove, no, the boy's fine and he's safe. And we should say up front, I don't think it's a spoiler, and I think it's quite important in kidnap stories to say up front, the kid's fine. The kid is unharmed. They don't exactly talk about potential for trauma or anything. The kid just seems to be absolutely fine with it. So great. I don't know how realistic that is, but I'm glad he's not hurt in any way. You then get back to the technical fascination when they realize what's going to happen, because of course first of all, that fantastic thing, he gets phoned on the train. Yes. And it's a phone booth in the train. He's like, oh my God, how brilliant. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a film before then. This idea that you could just dial a number on a train. And
there's a later Japanese mystery I read written in the 80s, I want to say, where someone has to receive a fax on a train, which is a similarly high-tech complication.
That's
And,
great. Yeah.
I wish I could remember which book it was. But
But that's a
yeah.
great moment because were thinking he's not on the train. How is this going to work? Because they just know, just sit on the train and we'll contact you. You'll know what to do. And then it's a phone call. So again, technology. You have to get the phone call. He gets in the phone call, gets the information, has an incredibly small amount of time to get it done. Because he has to basically, there's one single window. It's a small spoiler. I think we can give it away. There's one window because all the windows are sealed. So again, it's like a locked room, but there's this one bit where if you've got something that's not more than 7 centimeters in height, you can shove it through that window, which turns out basically it's the loo, isn't it?
Yes.
And it has been done at a precise moment between you see the boys there, so you're reassured. So he's prepared to pay because he can see the boys there and he's unharmed. And he has to throw it out. So it's kind of one side of the river and then the other side of the river, I think, across the bridge. I think that's right.
Yes, that's right.
Thanks for that, because I couldn't quite remember. And of course, then they said, oh, how the hell are we going to identify them? So basically they're getting still cameras. And then they put a film camera, and one of the detectives runs to the front of the bullet train. And this is the bit where I think they had to reshoot, as it turns out, because one of the cameras failed. I think they were talking about. And so it gets filmed. So then they analyze the film and literally frame by frame. So it's almost like sort of blow up or blow out. This idea that you examine the footage. The kind of. I mean, this was pre-Zapruder, but not much. But this idea that that's how the police are going to try and nab the villains, which is why they had to take the roof off that building because they couldn't shoot it so that you could see what you needed to see. It's just so dynamic. It works like a dream. And again, it changes the tone. But what's brilliant is they succeed in the sense that they pay the money. Okay, he's financially ruined, bad luck. And they get the boy back. But describe the scene when he goes to get the boy back, because I think it's fantastic.
It's lovely. So on the train, they've paid the money. It's so tense. You see Mifune's character just is so intense and so determined to push the money through. He is full of action. And you see the cop, Inspector Takura, played by Nakadai, who looks beaten down because he has failed to help retrieve the money. And then you get the car pulling up and this little road, and it stops right next to the camera, even though it could probably just drive the rest of the road up and stop next to the little boy. But
yes.
But they open the door, and no one has ever run faster than Toshiro Mifune as he goes to hug this little boy. And it is so redeeming for that character because you've seen him destroyed. The minute he puts that money through the window, his life is forever changed. And everyone, all of the cops know it, but it doesn't matter to him at that point. He has rescued the boy. And that is basically where Mifune's role in the film essentially stops until the coda at the end of the movie. You get a very short scene with him later in the streets of Yokohama, but a little like Psycho, where your lead just suddenly vanishes. Your lead is going to vanish from the film, and it becomes Tatsuya Nakadai's film from this point forwards as we follow the investigation. And if we're talking book comparison, this point in the film, it's an hour and 2 minutes in, is where the original storyline basically has ended. Everything has been resolved because you're at that same point where we've retrieved the child. That's the end of King's Ransom. And now we're going to get the police working incredibly hard out of a sense of guilt, out of a sense that something horribly unjust has happened to Gondo's character, and they really want to get results for him. And I think that is a really interesting difference between the two works. In King's Ransom, the police have an almost oppositional relationship to King. They chastise him at points and tell him off and tell him, you should be paying this ransom.
They don't like him. Yeah, I mean, it's got a bit of a vulgarian. They just don't like him.
But they find Gondo inherently noble in that point. And from that point forwards, they want to do everything for him. And I said we don't see him. We do see him very, very briefly mowing his lawn kind of pathetically, his tiny little 8-foot lawn on his concrete garden, and then sitting in his living room as people put little stickers on all of his furniture.
Because everything is going to have to be put up for sale.
Yeah, everything has to be put up for sale to pay off his creditors. It is essentially, at this point forwards, a police procedural as they try and track down the kidnapper.
I mean, I think we'll avoid obvious spoilers, but it does have a number of big set pieces. The film sort of, as you say, breaks down into, I suppose you could say, a basic 3-act structure is probably fair, because once Gondo exits the main narrative, then it becomes about the policeman finding the kidnapper. Now, the kidnapper is someone who gets introduced by the by.
Mm-hmm.
The policemen, 2 of them are walking in one direction, and turns out the guy who's a kidnapper is walking in the other direction on the other side of the river. And we sort of figure out who they are, and it turns out that they live just beneath this sumptuous home at the top of the hill. And so it's literally this sense of that they could see what was going on in the house, but that they're living in incredibly reduced circumstances. And at this point, we then get a number of very extended and very well done sequences, some of which do in fact draw on material from the novel, like obviously just the focus on the police procedure, and also very long. And there's about 100 cops, I think.
Yes.
They're all devoted because it's been covered in the press now, and there's just a huge outpouring of sympathy for, as you say, this noble act. You know, ruining yourself financially to ensure the safety of a boy who you know but who isn't even yours. It's the child of someone who works for you.
Apparently that was a fairly typical way that the Japanese police worked on high-profile cases. They kind of brought everyone in the department in to have an intensive kind of review, and used all of the resources to try and break down a big case very quickly. And that's partly possible because apparently there wasn't as much serious crime in Japan in that era. In terms of how it works for the film, I think it is a really smart choice. You referenced earlier about the choice to play back audio recordings rather than experience them live. And he's doing the same thing here. Rather than having us follow a series of interviews, he's having a meeting where people are going to interject and say, well, I met with this person and they told me this, and we see maybe 10 seconds or 15 seconds of that interview. We get only what we need, and then we keep moving forwards. So you have the lovely visual that you referenced of the huge map of Yokohama with the X's and the little crosses. And visually, that's exciting. You have this crush of people in this medium-sized room, and you get these wonderful little character moments. And there are so many good actors and good performances here. But I just want to flag up, there is a lovely moment where they speak to a tram operator that is probably, it's not the greatest moment in the film, but it's the one that I enjoy seeing the most every time it comes up, where he gives this little musical thing about the way that different tram lines sound. And it's utterly charming, but he is stuffing this room with some of his best bit players, some of his most recognizable character actors. And one of those, of course, is the chief of police, who's played by Kurosawa's most frequent collaborator, Takashi Shimura. And he is an actor he used again and again, had been his leading man for a number of years. At this point, he's in the waning period of his career, but he is playing the chief of police and he's directing this investigation. And even though he doesn't get very many lines, he's really there as a cameo. Simply putting him in the room, all of your attention goes to him if you're a Kurosawa fan. And he gets instant gravitas, instant importance. And it reminds you that Nakadai's character isn't the head of the department. He is a mid-level police officer.
I mean, there's that whole sequence in the drug den. I mean, what do you think about that? I'd actually forgotten that was in the film. I was so glad I rewatched it because it's almost like it's coming out of a 1920s expressionistic drama. It's extraordinary.
Kurosawa was, as a young boy, he had an older brother who loved European cinema. And in his book, which he calls something like an autobiography, he has a little list of some of the films that he saw. And his brother took him to see Fritz Lang films. So he's definitely very influenced by German Expressionism, I think it's fair to say. It's an incredible sequence. It is verging on horror. I think the way that you see the junkies in the street kind of slowly rotate their heads, it could be from a George Romero film. It is very creepy, very disturbing. And it's even creepier when you think about what the kidnapper is intending to do, which I won't go into. It's so tense and so confusing at first. And I think that's another thing, because we haven't really heard the kidnapper talk, other than on the recordings. We don't know what he has in mind. So we're always a step behind him, unless you're smart enough to have figured it out. But the police think they know what he's going to do, and he suddenly veers into this alley to do something else. So there's an element of surprise, and there's an element of absolute horror. And I think that this is, when we were planning this out, you referenced this film as a neo-noir. And I thought to myself, I've always thought of this as just being noir. But then I rewatched it last night and I paid very close attention to that sequence. I think that is your neo. That's your neo-noir. I don't think anything in classic noir is quite that style, where you get the consequences of crime shown very explicitly. They don't show the couple you referred to in the villa. We just see a small child look through a window and go, oh, they're sleeping. And that's, once again, that character not being traumatized at all. I don't understand that, but okay. But when we do see the consequences of what he's done in the alley, it is easily the most graphic moment in the film. A pure horror sequence. And I think it shows that character's evilness, that it isn't simply that they are a victim, because at that point, they are going to do something horrific. It is, I think the film needs it, because if it doesn't have that, you haven't really seen him do anything. It's all happened kind of off screen.
Yes.
But that does lead to people sometimes saying, should the police have handled the case a little differently? And in some interviews later, Kurosawa was asked about it, and he leaves it open to the person he's talking to about whether or not the police are acting heroically or not in the way that they try and catch him at that point. Because they've already figured out who it is. They know who the identity is, and they could have stopped things earlier in the case.
Yes, I mean, I suppose we could sort of mention, it's to do with back to this idea that we mentioned earlier, which is that they know they can get him for kidnapping, but they feel like he needs a much stronger sentence than the kidnapping one would bring, and they think they can get him for something far, far more serious. But to do that, they need to sort of follow him, see what he's doing, and basically push him in a certain direction. And we'll leave it at that, although it's kind of a shame not to discuss it. But I think that's one of the big differences from the book. I like the book a lot.
Yes.
I think it's really good. And I'm a huge fan of the series, but I really like it. I just think it's a really strong entry in the series. If we slightly shift, we'll go back to High and Low, but if we sort of downshift slightly, because of course there'd been an earlier adaptation of the novel already, and you reminded me of this because I'd somehow forgotten it existed, which was an adaptation done by McBain himself for the 87th Precinct TV series. It lasted only one season, and it starred Jenna Rowlands as Steve Carella's wife, Teddy, and Robert Lansing as Steve Carella, and Norman Fell is in it, and it's got some really good actors in it.
It also has Nancy Reagan.
This episode has Nancy Reagan as the wife, and we'll come back to talking about women in High and Low in a moment.
Have you gone completely out of your mind? Do you know what the penalty is for kidnapping?
It's I think, a perfectly decent adaptation of the novel. It follows it, but one of the things that it does differently, and I think in the context of TV at the time, they probably kind of sort of had to, but I'm sort of glad they did, because I have a lot of trouble with children in jeopardy narratives. I find them too easy, and two, they're just queasy making. They make the kidnapped boy much older. Much older. He's sort of a late teen, isn't he? He's a college kid. So he has a rather different relationship with the kidnappers, or at least two of them, particularly the wife. That changes it, so it makes it a lot less intense, a lot less potentially awful somehow. And that, I think, is an interesting shift. And yes, we've got Nancy Reagan, or Nancy Davis, as I think she was still credited at the time, playing King's wife. So she has this nice little role in it. Slightly bizarre. And again, I'd completely forgotten she was in it. I think it's a perfectly decent adaptation in terms of TV of the day.
Oh, sure.
It's not amazing or anything, but it does it right. I think it's more or less all there in an hour's TV.
Yeah, they really condense it. So The thing that struck me when I watched it is it somehow feels even more hard-boiled than the novel, because everything is going so quickly, because he has so much plot he has to fit in. And even with all the simplifications he makes to the story, it's still a lot of plot for, was it 45 minutes?
It's basically 48, 49 minutes plus adverts for an hour episode, yeah.
Well, I enjoyed it. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenna Rollins as Teddy is, and she's only in about half a dozen episodes, I think, if that. She's the best thing in it.
The other thing that strikes me, though, is he's adapting his own book, and he softens King. He makes the choice that King can't be as hard as he is in the book. In the book, he is not easy to like. I don't feel very much sympathy for King at all in the book. The King in the TV play is, at least he looks guilty. He looks like he's going through something, whereas he's pretty unrepentant about his choices, I would say, in the novel King's Ransom.
Yes, very softened, isn't it, by comparison? So definitely start with the book, no question about it. Having mentioned Nancy Davis, it would be interesting just to go back to an additional aspect to High and Low in particular, which was the way that women are represented in it, in the sense that, well, there's one female character in it, fundamentally, which is Gondo's wife, and it's a crucial part of the story, because she's the one who probably convinces him more than anyone, or rather speaks to his better nature, and I think knows it's there. But as we were mentioning earlier, there's that great moment. It says, yeah, besides, your fortune was based on her dowry. This is because he then says, you don't know what it's like to not have money. You come from a rich family. You've been well off all your life. You don't actually know what you're talking about. I do, but you don't. I think I could manage. I don't think you can, which is very interesting. And I think that's done very well, because she's the only significant woman. Otherwise, the only other, well, there's a character who's alluded to, who is the wife and the husband and wife kidnapping team.
Yes.
But they don't get a line of dialogue in the film. And otherwise, it's the people in the dope den.
Yes.
Who are presented, as you say, in this kind of almost zombie scary way, although again quite strong. This is a very interesting moment when they sort of basically throw out the cops who are following the kidnapper who's gone in there, and he's barely sort of got away with going in there. But when these other they feel that they're just almost like tourists, and they just want to come and see how poor people live, or as it were, or drug addicts, and kick them out. And so in a way that's interesting. But there isn't a single female police officer. And I think there's something conscious about this, because the first sequence is all about how they're talking about how they're going to make shoes for women. And it's about all these male executives talking about how women shop and what they shop for and what they need and what they like. Yes. And I find that very amusing.
Yeah.
And I think the irony is deliberate, you know.
Yeah. There's a moment where he's talking about his plans, and he basically says, you wouldn't know anything about women's shoes, to his wife. And it's, yeah, but it is very noticeable. I think it's a theme in a number of his films, that he doesn't have as many female characters as he does male characters, and often they're underdeveloped. I don't think that's the case in High and Low. I think that the character of the wife, although she doesn't get very much to do, what she does is so important to the story that there's kind of a shorthand in their relationship. And it's the same actress who plays Mifune's wife in Kurosawa's previous noir film, The Bad Sleep Well. So they've worked together before, and you do get the sense that these two actors, that they connect to each other. There's a moment in that scene, we referenced the 5-minute pleading scene, where she comes in and she tries to comfort the chauffeur, and it's a lovely performance from both actors. And she says, don't worry, you don't need to ask anymore, I will ask for you. And there is that sense that she is going to get through to him. Likewise, his little boy, June, gets through to him as well.
The chauffeur, he's in a way not particularly sympathetic character, actually, because of the groveling is so extreme that you almost want to say, man up, for goodness sake, which is a very unkind way of doing it. But at the same time, he just sort of, because then he makes this comment later on, and says, I don't really like rich folk, but, you know, it's very, you know, it's all very pointed. It's all very carefully worked out. Nothing's left to chance. in this film.
No.
I think its effects are very carefully calculated. And again, of course, a brilliant cast, as you mentioned, because, of course, Kurosawa is using actors that he's used so many times before. I mean, Mifune, he made, 16 films with him? And this is, their next to last film together?
It is, yeah.
And Shimura, I think they made 21 films together, who, of course, so magnificent, and particularly Akira, which is just this, probably is the best film ever made. It's sort of brilliant. Well, I mean, if it's not Citizen Kane, but I mean, I love that film.
No, it's
so
my wife's.
good.
That's the one that she likes, and One Wonderful Sunday as well. Those are her two favorite Kurosawa movies.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, that doesn't get picked a lot. Actually,
no, it doesn't, and it actually has a scene that reminds me of the Dope Alley scene, where a character in that film has to walk down to a kind of shady bar, and it's full of drunks and prostitutes, and it's not quite as extreme as this one, but it did feel like a proto version of that, sort of 10 years or 15 years earlier.
It holds up brilliantly. And one of the reasons we're talking about this film now is, of course, that after many attempts, it looks like we're very soon going to be seeing this remake by Spike Lee, starring Denzel Washington. There were previous attempts. David Mamet wrote a script. Scorsese was going to direct at one point. I mean, this is going back decades. It's a remake of the film. I don't think it's an adaptation of the novel. Obviously, rights are involved, but I don't think they've necessarily gone back to that. And that's going to be, I think, very interesting. I'm very curious to know how that goes. So this is Highest to Lowest, which I got to tell you is a rubbish title, because it really is. And that's 2, of course, with a number 2. High and Low is quite a clever title. I mean, in Japanese, it's Heaven and Hell, isn't it?
Yes.
A direct translation. This idea of, the wealthy who live up and the poor who live beneath. But High and Low, I think, is quite clever, because obviously it has a double meaning in English. So I think I've always thought that was actually, it may not be literally as correct, but in actual fact, I think you get a strong sense of ambiguity and ambivalence and of potential complexity within that well-known phrase. I am looking forward to the remake. I am very curious. Spike Lee is such a fascinating filmmaker.
For sure.
He hasn't made quite as many films with Washington as Kurosawa's made with Mifune, but what the hey, they're working at it, so I think that's really good.
There's more to life than just making money. It's integrity. That's what you stand for. It's what you actually believe in. Hey, man! Do you believe in yourself? Revenge! Do you believe you'll be successful? You're the man! And the hard times will come from the good times. The hard times will come from the success. The hard times will come from the money, and the mayhem follows.
What I was going to suggest we consider for a nanosecond was this pet theory of mine, which is as follows. There is this film called Ransom, and there are 2 films called Ransom in this particular context. One is a 1956 film called Ransom, starring Glenn Ford and Donna Reed. And there's the remake of it, which came out in 1996, starring Mel Gibson and Rene Russo, directed by Ron Howard. They're both based on a television play called Fearful Decision that was originally broadcast live, and which was co-written by Richard Maybaum and Cyril Hume. Richard Maybaum, of course, had an incredible screenwriting career, worked with F. Scott Fitzgerald in the 1930s, and wrote more James Bond films right to the end of the 1980s than any other writer by far. He was there on the first one. 30 years later, he's still cranking them out. Incredible career. That is a story about this executive whose son gets kidnapped, and he decides not to pay because he thinks they are going to kill the son, and he would rather get the money as a bounty, and he thinks he's got a better chance of getting his son back alive that way.
It's 2-1. You'll get the boy back whether you pay or not.
You mean my paying the ransom? That won't affect the outcome at all?
Mr. Stannard, you can pay and get him back, or you can pay and not get him back.
Or you can refuse to pay and lose. Or you can refuse to pay and still get him back. You see, it's still 2-1 your favor either way.
As a film, that came out some 2 years before King's Ransom, Ed McBain novel, came out. And it came out the same year from the same studio that had just adapted Evan Hunter's Blackboard Jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always found it really surprising that it has such a similar core premise. And my pet theory, and I cannot back it up at all, is that Hunter was, or McBain, was initially approached to maybe do a novelization of it because he was known at MGM. They knew who he was doing all kinds of writing at the time, and that perhaps they wanted to do a novelization of the movie Ransom when it was adapted from the TV play. The reason I say that is because of the way that the novel works, which is that it's limited to really two main sets, and a lot of it plays out sort of in real time, as does that first act in High and Low, which is something that you would anticipate in live television, which is extremely theatrical. And again, it's a suspense drama and it's all in real time, roughly speaking. So it seems to sort of reflect that aspect of it. And it's this, unusual technique for a novel at the time, and certainly for the 87th Precinct series. I suggested you maybe go watch Ransom. Did you actually get a chance to look at it? And what do you think of my ridiculous pet theory?
Well, I don't think it's a ridiculous pet theory, for the
Yay.
start. I think that the idea of having a kidnapping story in which the victim, or one of the victims, decides not to go along with the ransom demand is such an unusual idea that I think any repetition of that in close proximity to each other is inherently going to raise that question. And the treatment is fairly similar. You do get questions asked. I think they unfold very differently, but I think that the inspiration point is there. Whether he was ever thinking about novelizing it or was involved in some way, I don't know. It is more than possible, though, that he saw the broadcast and was inspired to take it, because he goes in a different direction ultimately with how it plays out. The film, it's okay. I'm not the huge.
You mean the
biggest
1990s version?
Sorry, no, the 1956 version.
1956 version, yes.
I'm
super
not
intense.
the biggest. It's very intense. I'm not a huge fan of Glenn Ford. I find him.
What?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of Glenn Ford in this film. I find his direct to camera appeal at the end, it didn't hit me the way I think it's meant to.
Right. Yeah.
The actors I love in this film are Leslie Nielsen.
I know.
And Enrico Palazzo himself, a Naked Gun fans, and Juan Hernandez, who plays a servant.
Oh, he's
in the
such
household.
a great actor. Yeah,
he's amazing, and there's a scene between the two of those actors towards the end of the film that is really powerful and eclipses the camera appeal that Glenn Ford will do for me. The 96 one I prefer as a film, and I was not expecting to. I watched it. I think he actually uses Ron Howard, or the script for that, perhaps uses a McBain story, because it makes some choices to show us the kidnappers. And right from the start. Not all of the kidnappers, perhaps, but enough of them. And you get a very similar story, and then it goes a completely different direction in the last half hour and becomes a super intense, very enjoyable thriller.
There's this really fun critique of the film when it came out at the time. They'd liked it, but they pointed out something which has always made me laugh, which is that in the 96 version, basically all the kidnappers are played by actors who are well known for appearing in indie films, whereas the protagonists are all ones who appear in A-list big budget Hollywood movies.
That's a fair point.
I think that's quite fun, but it's one of those films that I think probably changed the perception of Ron Howard as a filmmaker around that time. That and Apollo 13 as someone who could handle quite strong themes, I think, and ideas. And I think it works extremely well. It's a little overlong, but it works really well. So, I'm glad you enjoyed them anyway.
Definitely. It also is fascinating with technology. You get the voice-changing tech that they use. You get a drop that isn't too dissimilar from McBain's drop of the money.
But of course, you could argue in almost any kidnap-type thriller, usually one of the ways you decide if it's a good film or not, or if it's an ingenious film or not, is if they've come up with a genuinely neat way of dropping off the money and not getting caught. Because it's sort of, you think they're all going to fail on that basis, you know? And so now, of course, it's completely different. It's just, sure, I'll just do it on the dark web. You know? I'm not going to give you a bag of cash anymore, you know? I think High and Low is very accessible. It's a brilliant film, you know, and gosh, we haven't even talked about that plume of pink smoke, which is that brilliant because he does burn the bag. And in the middle of this black and white movie, you suddenly get this bit of pink and changes the moment in the film. It's when they start really zeroing in on the kidnapper. And eventually Kurosawa would start making films in color as well. But a marvelous moment, you know, right up there with the girl in the red dress in Schindler's List, perhaps, and with a different effect, but one that's very striking. But it's always been available on VHS and DVD, and now I think there are very good versions available on Blu-ray in Japan and in the States and in the UK. I'm very glad to have the new BFI Blu-ray because I had the older BFI DVD, which was pretty bad looking, frankly. The same master they'd used for the VHS decades earlier. So it's great to have it in high definition. So
for sure.
It's such a great film.
It's probably worth mentioning, though, that this film was received well on a technical level. But at the time, critics, certainly in the United States, were wondering what on earth Kurosawa was doing, directing this type of movie. And when I was first becoming interested in the director and learning about him, this film wasn't one of the ones that was mentioned as one of the 5 or 10 films that you need to see. It was very much focused on the samurai films. And I feel that it is definitely getting more and more attention as the years have gone on.
One of the things that we probably could mention with a little bit of caution for spoiler purposes is the ending is very important in the film. I think the way it's handled has a kind of perfect sort of symmetry to it in terms of the structure of the film. You don't really want to give it away. It has a very famously, I think, abrupt ending. Originally, when it was shot with a slightly different ending, there was another scene after it.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen the original Japanese trailer, but it's in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's really worth digging that out. I'll put a link to it on the page when the podcast drops, because weirdly, the trailer starts with that. In other words, they make it all about moral ambiguity and uncertainty and the instant drama of the situation. So you know that going in. And what it has is it has an additional sequence, which is the one that's been discussed elsewhere, which I know you're aware of. And so you actually see it, you know, and then it goes back to the beginning of the film, and the trailer tells you what else happened. So I know, very strange selling technique, I think. You know, of all the things you don't imagine you would give away in a movie trailer, particularly in a thriller, is the ending. But no, not only that, it's got more ending than the actual film does. So how about that? So it's worth seeing once you've seen the movie. So spoiler alert for the trailer, but fascinating. You know,
no, it was a decision. He shot them, as you say, and then he decided he didn't need that. The abrupt ending was actually more effective. And even though he'd gone to the expense of that final scene, it just ended up on the cutting room floor, like you say.
And it is a smack in the face. I mean, it really is. It's brilliant. It is so well done.
It is. I'm sure that Nakadai was not thrilled at his final scene, just completely disappearing from the film.
That is a shame. And he's great in it. He's great in it as well. You know, he deserves a lot of credit, actually. So High and Low, everybody should go see it if they haven't already. And if they have, they should go see it again. And then they should maybe go see the Spike Lee movie and see how they compare. I'm very curious. I know it's set in the music industry. I know very little else about it.
There is, from the look of the trailer, going to be a train involved. That's
okay then.
So maybe we'll get a similar sequence. I'm excited. Just this story is one that I think has such potential to be done again. It will hit differently because obviously different circumstances. But I'm really interested to see what Lee hones in on and thinks is important and admirable about the film, and hopefully he'll bring his own thing to it as well. It doesn't look like it's going to feature a shoe being ripped apart, which is disappointing because Mifune tearing apart a shoe is definitely a highlight of High and Low.
It is.
It is.
It's just got cardboard in it. You know, it's just brilliant. I know.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even work if it was in the CD, would it?
No, absolutely.
So trying to bend a CD for 5 minutes. That would be brilliant. Just to finish off, I thought I would ask a final noir-related question. Have you seen a noir film lately that isn't High and Low? And would you recommend it to the listeners?
Absolutely. I have a couple that I've really enjoyed lately. I recently watched a neo-noir called Lone Star by John Sayles.
Oh, such a great film.
It's an amazing film. I knew nothing about it, and it's very much a look into the history of a community, the history of an individual character, and finding out about that character's past. And it's like the myths and legends that grow up in a small town. Just a phenomenal piece of filmmaking. Some amazing performances in that film. The other one is a Japanese noir. It's not as well known. It's Intimidation by Koriyoshi Kurihara.
I don't know.
Okay, so it is about these two characters who are childhood friends, and they work for the same bank, but one of them has made it big. The other one, his career is stagnating. And the one who's made it big has made it big by marrying one of the executive's daughters. So he's about to go and get promoted up to head office. And right before the promotion, he receives a blackmail demand. And he's told, you need to go and get some money for us. And of course, he has no hope of raising this. So the blackmailer suggests, rob your own bank. And who is the night watchman that night? It is his good childhood friend. And it's incredibly tight. I think it's an hour and 10 minutes. But it is thrilling. It has twists and turns. It has some beautiful character moments. And that film deserves an audience. I think it's from the 60s. I didn't write down the year. It's just an incredible piece of filmmaking. And I need to check out more from this director.
Oh, I can't wait. That sounds absolutely fantastic. It's actually, I was just talking to the organizer for Film Noir UK's 2025 film festival.
Okay.
And it's okay for me to say this now because by the time this is broadcast, the news will be out. But the main theme is going to be heist movies.
Ooh.
And so the festival is going to be end of October. This is would be actually a perfect film. I suspect the program we will, I'll send him an email. So I can't guarantee I've had any success, but that sounds utterly brilliant. Oh, can't wait. By the way, have you seen City of Hope by John Sayles?
No, I haven't.
You have to see that. If you liked Lone Star, you've got to see City of Hope. It's
City
brilliant.
Of Hope. Let me just
you can
write
get
that
it
down.
on. It's on Amazon Prime, but it was also released on Blu-ray last year. It's got, I think, unfortunately, hasn't got much in way of extras, except an audio commentary by John Sayles, who writes, directs, and edits his films and co-produces them with his partner Maggie Renzi. So he knows exactly what to say about it. But it's fantastic movie. Fantastic movie. And such great choices. Aidan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been fantastic.
I've really enjoyed chatting to you about one of my very favorite movies.
Oh, well, I was going to say, actually, Aidan, before we finish up, so High and Low is your third favorite movie, and The Third Man is your first favorite movie?
Joint first, yeah.
So what's the other one?
The other one is...
You haven't forgotten your own favorite movie. What?
No, it's
been a long podcast.
No. So the reason I started my blog, right, is that people put you on the spot about stuff, and the book title, and you just can't think of it when the person's in front of you asking the question. Okay.
We can totally re-record this bit. I don't, I don't mean to make fun.
No. I'm enjoying my inability. I can't believe I remembered everything else. In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai.
Ah, fantastic.
It's an incredible film, and it choked me up and made me cry. And it's another film that, like High and Low, it developed differently. It was cut differently so that the characters made different choices, and it gives it a different feel. And if they'd gone with the original intention, I would not like the film anywhere near as much. But an incredible piece of filmmaking with some breathtaking cinematography.
Isn't that one of those films that there's a new edition of it which has proved slightly controversial? I think there's
the color grading has
color
changed.
grading, right? Yeah, which is a little bit infuriating. I think as long as I get both versions, I'm okay. But it's like William Friedkin sort of redoing The French Connection, you know, and everybody, including the cinematographer, saying that's terrible. But you know, beyond the whole kind of, you know, George Lucas and making Greedo not shoot first or whatever. Or was it the other way around? Yes. Anyway, on that note of uncertainty, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Aidan. We must do this again sometime.
I would love that.
Thank you so much, mate. Take care.
Take care.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix. And it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.